What happens when a single moment of rage on a private jet collides with the immeasurable power of the 1%? You're about to find out. This isn't a story about a simple argument at 30,000 feet. This is the story of Melanie Croft, a flight attendant who did the unthinkable. She slapped the son of a black billionaire, Peter Thorne. But the real story isn't the slap. It's what happened in the seconds that followed when the engines of the Gulfstream G700 went silent. The flight froze on the tarmac, and a war began that would decimate livers, expose dark secrets, and prove that sometimes the only thing more dangerous than losing control is trying to have too much of it. The air inside the exclusive Onyx wing of Teterboro Airport didn't just smell clean, it smelled expensive. It was a curated aroma of Italian leather, freshly brewed single-origin coffee, and the faint, crisp scent of money, old, new, and limitless. It was here that Aura Air, the most exclusive charter airline on the planet, catered to a clientele who didn't just fly. They commanded the skies. Melanie Croft, senior flight attendant for Aura Air, smoothed down the front of her tailored uniform for the 10th time. Today was a big one. The client was Marcus Thorne, the founder and CEO of Thorne Dynamics, a man whose net worth was a subject of whispered debate and open admiration on the pages of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. At 58, Thorne wasn't just a billionaire. He was an icon, a self-made titan of the logistics and tech world who had shattered glass ceilings with a sledgehammer of sheer will and intellect. He was also one of the very few black men to have ever reached such a stratosphere of wealth and power. But today's flight wasn't for Marcus. It was for his son, Peter Thorne, age 22, and his entourage. Melanie had worked the Thorne flights before. Marcus was demanding but professional, a man who appreciated precision and quiet competence. His son was different. Peter wore his father's wealth like a second skin, a layer of armor that made him feel invincible and rendered everyone else invisible. As she reviewed the passenger manifest, Melanie's jaw tightened. Peter Thorne, Liam Hayes, his perennial sidekick, two young women listed only as guests of Mr. Thorne, who had a habit of changing their names as often as their outfits. The flight plan was simple: Teterboro to St. Bart's, a weekend of sun, sand, and sin, funded by a fortune Peter had never earned. A knot of anxiety tightened in Melanie's stomach. It had been a rough month. Her daughter Lily had been sick, a nasty bout of pneumonia that had eaten through their savings, and Melanie's paid time off. Her ex-husband David was as usual late on his child support, his texts full of flimsy excuses that boiled her blood. She had taken this extra shift, a last-minute swap, for the lucrative bonus pay that came with a high-value client like Thorne. She needed the money, desperately. She just had to get through the next 6 hours with a serene smile plastered on her face. The roar of a blacked-out Mercedes Maybach pulling up on the tarmac signaled their arrival. Peter Thorne emerged, not so much stepping out of the car as being presented by it. He was dressed in a coordinated silk lounge set that probably cost more than Melanie's monthly mortgage payment. His friend Liam trailed him a perpetual echo, and the two women, all legs and designer sunglasses, giggled behind them. "Melanie, good to see you." Peter said, his greeting less a pleasantry and more a confirmation that his servant had arrived. He didn't make eye contact, his attention already on his phone. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Thorne," Melanie said, her voice a study in professional warmth. "Mr. Hayes, ladies, can I get you settled in?" They swept past her into the cabin of the Gulfstream G700, a marvel of bespoke aviation. cream leather seats, polished mahogany, and a state-of-the-art entertainment system. Peter immediately threw his carry-on onto a seat, scuffing the pristine leather. "Champagne, the good stuff, and tell the pilot I want to be in the air 10 minutes ago." Melanie's smile didn't waver. "Of course, Mr. Thorne. I just need to conduct a brief safety announcement once you're seated." Liam snorted. "Dude, we've flown 100 times. We know where the floaty things are. Get the bubbles." The girls giggled in agreement. Melanie felt a familiar prickle of anger. It wasn't just the dismissiveness. It was the utter lack of regard for the rules, the procedures that were there to keep them all alive. She had seen it 100 times with the ultra-rich, a belief that their wealth exempted them from the mundane laws of physics and federal regulations. "It's FAA policy, sir," she said, keeping her tone light but firm. "It will only take a moment." Peter finally looked at her, his eyes cold and appraising. "Fine. Do your thing. Make it quick." She ran through the safety briefing, her words falling into the dead air of their indifference. They were all on their phones, scrolling, texting, absorbed in their digital worlds. As she finished, she moved to the galley to prepare the drinks. The galley was her sanctuary, a small, organized space where she was in control. She took a deep breath, picturing Lily's smiling face. Just get through the flight. She returned with a silver tray, holding a chilled bottle of Dom Perignon and 4 crystal flutes. As she poured, one of the girls who had introduced herself as Kiki pointed to the bowl of mixed nuts on the center table. "Ooh, can you bring some more of those? I'm like starving." Melanie paused. "Of course, but before I do, I must confirm. Does anyone on board have any allergies? Specifically, a nut allergy?" It was standard procedure, a crucial one. An anaphylactic reaction at 40,000 feet was a life-or-death emergency. Peter waved a dismissive hand. "No, no one cares. Just bring the nuts." "Sir, I do need a verbal confirmation from everyone for the flight report," Melanie insisted. It was a lie, but a necessary one, to ensure she got a clear answer. "Your father, Mr. Thorne, is very particular about safety protocols." Mentioning his father had the desired effect. Peter's jaw clenched. He hated being reminded that the plane, the pilot, the champagne, all of it belonged to Marcus. "Fine," he snapped. He glanced at Liam. "No." At the girls. "No, happy." Melanie's eyes lingered on the second girl, Tiffany, who had been quiet, scrolling through her phone. "Ma'am?" Tiffany looked up, startled. "Oh. No, I'm fine." Something in her hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty, set off an alarm in Melanie's head. She had been a flight attendant for 15 years. She had a sixth sense for this stuff. "Are you absolutely certain?" Melanie pressed gently. "We have cashews, almonds, and pistachios in that mix. Some people have reactions to specific types." Peter slammed his hand down on the armrest, making everyone jump. "For God's sake," she said, "no. Are you deaf, or are you just trying to be difficult? My father pays your salary so you can pour drinks and bring snacks, not so you can interrogate my guests. Now get more nuts and leave us alone." The venom in his voice was a physical blow. Every frustration from the past month, the bills, the loneliness, the exhaustion coalesced into a single point of white-hot rage in Melanie's chest. Her professionalism, the carefully constructed wall she had built around herself for 15 years, began to crack. She looked at Peter, at his smug, entitled face, and saw everything she hated about her life. He was a boy playing king in a castle. His father had built a boy who had never known a single day of real struggle. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "My job is to ensure the safety of everyone on this aircraft. That is my primary responsibility, above and beyond serving you champagne. Your primary responsibility is to do as you're told, he retorted, leaning forward. You are staff, that's all. Now stop talking back and do your job. And then he did something that tipped her over the edge. He smirked, a slow, condescending smirk that said, I own you. In that moment, Melanie Croft ceased to be a flight attendant. She was a mother, a woman pushed to her absolute limit. The carefully constructed dam of her composure didn't just break, it exploded. Her hand moved before her brain could catch up. The sound it made was shocking in the quiet cabin. A sharp, stinging crack as her open palm connected with Peter Thorne's cheek. The world went silent. The smirk was gone from Peter's face, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. A red handprint began to bloom on his skin. Liam's jaw was on the floor. The two girls gasped, their hands flying to their mouths. Peter slowly brought a hand to his cheek, his eyes wide with disbelief. No one had ever dared. No one. He looked at Melanie, and his shock morphed into a chilling reptilian fury. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He simply pulled out his phone, his fingers moving with terrifying speed. He pressed a single contact on his favorites list. Dad, he said, his voice low and trembling with rage. It's Peter. A pause. The flight attendant just assaulted me. Another pause. Melanie's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. What had she done? Yes, she hit me, Peter continued. Aura Air. Flight 771. We're still on the tarmac at Teterboro. He listened for a moment, a cruel, triumphant smile slowly spreading across his lips as he looked directly at Melanie. Thank you, Dad, he said, and hung up. He placed the phone face down on the table. You have no idea what you've just done, he whispered. Not 30 seconds later, the low hum of the Gulf Stream's powerful Rolls-Royce engines, which had been spooling up for takeoff, began to wind down. A sudden jarring silence fell over the plane. Then came the voice of Captain Eva Rostova over the cabin speaker, her tone clipped and devoid of emotion. Flight attendants' cabin secure. All passengers remain in your seats. We are holding our position on the tarmac. The flight and Melanie Croft's entire world had just frozen solid. The silence that followed Captain Rostova's announcement was heavier than any turbulence Melanie had ever experienced. It was a dead, suffocating weight, filled with the unspoken reality of what had just happened. The power of Marcus Thorne had reached out from hundreds of miles away, and with a single phone call, halted a 50-ton aircraft in its tracks. Peter Thorne leaned back in his seat, the red mark on his cheek, a badge of victory. He looked at Melanie not with anger anymore, but with a kind of detached pity, the way one might look at an insect just before crushing it. You should have just brought the nuts, he said softly. Melanie stood rooted to the spot, her hand still tingling, her mind a maelstrom of panic. The gravity of her action crashed down on her. She hadn't just slapped a passenger. She had slapped the son of a man who could buy and sell the entire airline without blinking. She thought of Lily. She thought of her mortgage, her career, her livelihood, her future. All of it had just been incinerated by one impulsive, five-fingered mistake. The cabin door hissed open. Captain Rostova stood there, her face a mask of grim professionalism. She was a stern ex-Air Force pilot in her late 40s, a woman who commanded respect and tolerated no nonsense. Her eyes, cold and blue, swept over the scene. Peter holding his cheek. Melanie pale and trembling. The other passengers frozen in a tableau of shock. Melanie. Captain Rostova said, her voice cutting through the tension. My cockpit, now. As Melanie walked past the passengers, she could feel their stares. They weren't just looking at her. They were looking at a ghost, a woman whose career had just died before their eyes. Inside the cockpit, the first officer, a young man named Ben, stared resolutely at his controls, pretending to be absorbed in his pre-flight checklist. Captain Rostova closed the door. "What happened?" she asked, her voice low and intense. "He was disrespectful." Melanie stammered the words, feeling pathetic and inadequate. "He was demanding, he insulted me. He wouldn't listen to the safety protocol regarding the nut allergy." "Did you strike a passenger, Melanie?" Rostova cut her off, her gaze unwavering. Melanie swallowed hard. "Yes, Captain. I did." Rostova closed her eyes for a brief second, a flicker of something disappointment, frustration crossing her features. When she opened them, she was all business again. "I just got a call from Aura Air's head of operations, who got a call from Marcus Thorne's chief of staff, who got a call from Marcus Thorne himself. The order was direct: ground the plane. Do not move." "Melanie, this isn't just an incident report. This is an international event." I lost my temper," Melanie whispered, tears finally welling in her eyes. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry isn't going to cut it," Rostova said, her tone softening slightly but still firm. "Go to the rear galley. Stay there. Do not interact with the passengers. Do not say another word. Do you understand?" "Yes, Captain." As Melanie retreated to the galley, the sound of approaching sirens began to bleed through the fuselage. Red and blue lights flashed across the tarmac, painting the cabin in strobing colors of doom. 2 black SUVs, the kind used by federal agents, or in this case, the infinitely more powerful private security of a billionaire, pulled up alongside the jet. The cabin door opened again. This time it wasn't the captain. It was a man in a flawlessly tailored Tom Ford suit. He was tall, impeccably groomed, with the calm, predatory stillness of a shark. "Peter," the man said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Arthur," Peter said, though he gestured to his cheek for effect. Arthur Finch was Marcus Thorne's lead counsel and chief fixer. He was a legendary figure in corporate law, a man who didn't argue cases so much as make problems disappear. His presence on the tarmac, less than 20 minutes after the phone call, was a terrifying display of the Thorne machine's efficiency. Finch's eyes, cold and analytical, found Melanie cowering in the galley. He didn't address her. He didn't even acknowledge her as a person. He simply turned to one of the security men who had followed him on board. "Secure her personal effects. Escort her to the first vehicle," he commanded. "She is not to speak to anyone." 2 hulking security guards moved toward Melanie. This was it. She was being arrested. Or worse, she didn't resist. She was too numb. They took her purse and her small crew bag, their movements efficient and impersonal. As they led her toward the door, she passed Peter one last time. He was sipping the champagne she had poured, a look of serene satisfaction on his face. Walking down the air stairs and onto the tarmac was a walk of shame. The flashing lights, the grim-faced security. The imposing figure of Arthur Finch directing the operation. It all felt surreal, like a scene from a movie. She was placed in the back of an SUV. The door closed with a heavy, final thud, sealing her in. Inside the plane, Arthur Finch was in damage control mode. He spoke quietly to Liam and the 2 young women. His tone was reassuring, but his message was clear. They had seen nothing. They would say nothing. A representative from Mr. Thorne's office would be in touch to express his gratitude for their discretion. gratitude that would undoubtedly be expressed in a very tangible monetary form. He then approached Captain Rostova. "Captain," he said, offering a thin, professional smile. "My apologies for this disruption. Mr. Thorne holds Aura Air in the highest regard. We consider this matter an unfortunate, isolated incident with a rogue employee." Captain Rostova was unfazed. "Mr. Finch, I have a passenger who was assaulted and an employee who is now in the custody of your private security. I will be filing a full report with the FAA and the Port Authority." "Of course," Finch said smoothly. "As you should. We will cooperate fully. Our only concern is for the well-being of young Mr. Thorne. We will be making arrangements for him and his guests to continue their trip on another aircraft. Thorne Dynamics will naturally compensate Aura Air for any and all expenses incurred." He handed her a business card. "Have your corporate office contact me directly. We will make this right." "We will make this right." The words hung in the air, a euphemism for what he really meant. "We will bury this with money." As the SUV carrying Melanie pulled away, she looked out the window at the Gulfstream G700, a beautiful silver bird now grounded and silent because of her. She had been so proud to work on that plane. Now it was the scene of her professional suicide. The car didn't take her to a police station. Instead, it drove to a nondescript office building a few miles from the airport. She was led into a small, windowless conference room and left alone. A bottle of water sat on the table. It felt like an interrogation room. An hour passed, then another. The silence was a form of torture designed to let her anxiety build, to let the consequences of her actions fester in her mind. Finally, the door opened, and a woman from Aura Air's Human Resources Department entered, accompanied by a corporate lawyer Melanie had never seen before. The HR woman, Brenda, looked deeply uncomfortable. "Melanie," Brenda began, avoiding eye contact. "This is a very serious situation." The lawyer took over. "Ms. Croft, due to your gross misconduct, including the physical assault of a client, Aura Air, is terminating your employment effective immediately." There it was. The axe had fallen. "You will be required to sign a non-disclosure agreement," the lawyer continued, sliding a thick stack of papers across the table. "This NDA is comprehensive. You will not speak of this incident or of your employment with Aura Air or of any of our clients, specifically the Thorne family, to anyone. Not to the media, not on social media, not even to your family. In exchange for your full and immediate cooperation," Brenda added, finally looking at her, "Aura Air is prepared to offer you a severance package of 2 months' pay and will not contest your unemployment filing, provided you sign the NDA today." Melanie stared at the papers. It was hush money. They wanted to buy her silence to erase the incident, as if it had never happened. 2 months' pay. It was an insulting pittance, a fraction of what she needed to stay afloat. But in that moment of terror, it felt like a lifeline. Sign the papers, take the money, and maybe, just maybe, she could salvage some piece of her life. But then she thought of Peter Thorne's smirk. She thought of the casual cruelty, the way he had dismissed her, the way his father's power had descended like a thunderbolt. Something inside her hardened. It wasn't just about the slap anymore. It was about the crushing, arrogant power that had followed. They thought they could just swat her away like a fly. "And what if I don't sign?" Melanie asked, her voice surprisingly steady. The lawyer's expression soured. "If you don't sign, you will receive no severance. Aura Air will aggressively contest your unemployment claim. Furthermore, Mr. Thorne is fully prepared to press criminal assault charges against you. With 4 witnesses, he will have no trouble securing a conviction. You'll have a criminal record, making it nearly impossible to find a new job. Mr. Finch's office has also made it clear they are prepared to file a civil suit against you for personal injury and emotional distress. They will litigate you into bankruptcy. They will take your house. They will ruin you. He leaned back, confident. So you can take the 2 months' pay and disappear quietly, or you can fight and lose everything. The choice is yours. Melanie looked at the NDA, then at the 2 stoic faces in front of her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her gut. But now it was mixed with a new defiant anger. They hadn't just fired her. They had threatened her, cornered her, and tried to bully her into oblivion. She pushed the papers back across the table. "I'm not signing anything," she said. "And you can tell Mr. Finch and his client that if they want a fight, they're going to get one." The lawyer sighed, a look of weary condescension on his face. "You're making a terrible mistake, Miss Croft." "Maybe," Melanie said, standing up. "But it's my mistake to make." As she walked out of the room, leaving her job, her severance, and her security behind, she had no plan. No money. No lawyer. All she had was a burning sense of injustice and the terrifying, liberating knowledge that she had nothing left to lose. The war had begun. Melanie stepped out of the office building into the grey New Jersey afternoon, feeling like a soldier who had just deserted her post. The bravado she had shown in the conference room evaporated in the open air, replaced by a raw, gnawing panic. She had no job. She had a mortgage payment due in 2 weeks. She had a daughter who depended on her for everything, and she had just declared war on a billionaire. She took a bus home, unable to afford a taxi. Every face on the bus seemed to be judging her. Every srun she heard in the distance made her flinch, expecting to be arrested at any moment. When she finally got back to her modest suburban house, she walked in and collapsed onto her sofa, the full weight of her decision crashing down on her. Meanwhile, the story was beginning to leak. Despite Arthur Finch's best efforts to plug the dam, water finds a way to seep through the cracks. A ground crew member at Teterboro had seen the commotion and texted a friend who worked for a celebrity gossip blog. A passenger in another private jet had filmed the flashing lights around the Aura Air Gulf Stream on their phone. Whispers turned into rumors, and rumors turned into digital chatter. The first story to break was on a sleazy site called Jet Set Junkie. The headline was pure clickbait. AIR Rage Mystery Woman ejected from Thorne Air's jet. The story was thin on details, heavy on speculation. But it was enough. The real earthquake hit 6 hours later. Isabel Rossi, a sharp, ambitious investigative journalist for the online news outlet The Vanguard, got a tip. Her source was anonymous, but credible someone inside Aura Air's corporate structure who was disgusted by the company's immediate capitulation to Thorne. The source gave Rossi the key details. The employee's name was Melanie Croft, a 15-year veteran flight attendant. The incident involved Peter Thorne, and it had started over a request to confirm a nut allergy. Isabel Rossi knew she had gold. This wasn't just celebrity gossip. This was a story about class power and corporate ethics. She worked her sources, finding a former colleague of Melanie's who, under the condition of anonymity, described her as a consummate professional and a devoted single mother who was always stressed about money. Rossi's article, published late that night, was a masterpiece of narrative journalism. The headline was explosive: "The slap heard round the Tarmac flight attendant fired, threatened after confronting billionaire's son over safety." The story went viral almost instantly. By morning, Melanie Croft's name was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. The narrative Rossi had framed was powerful and immediately resonant. The hard-working single-mother flight attendant standing up for safety versus the arrogant, spoiled rich kid who saw her as his personal servant. Melanie woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. It had been vibrating on her nightstand all night, but she had been too consumed by despair to check it. Now she saw hundreds of notifications, texts from friends, family, and former colleagues she hadn't spoken to in years, missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. When she opened Twitter, she gasped. Her name was everywhere. #team. Melanie was trending. Memes were already circulating her face photoshopped onto the body of Rocky Balboa, Peter Thorne's face on a milk carton, under the heading "Missing One Chin." A GoFundMe page had been started for her by a sympathetic airline union in another state. The title was, "Help Melanie Croft Fight the Billionaire Bully." The initial goal was $10,000 to cover legal fees. When Melanie looked at it, her hands trembling, it was already over $75,000, and climbing by the minute. Donations were pouring in from flight attendants, waiters, retail workers, nurses, anyone who had ever had to smile through gritted teeth while being treated poorly by a wealthy customer. One comment read, "Melanie is all of us. She just did what we all wish we could do." Another said, "Finally, one of the 1% gets a taste of reality. Stay strong, Melanie." It was overwhelming, a tidal wave of public support that left her breathless. She wasn't a pariah. She was a folk hero. The shame and fear she had felt were replaced by a dizzying sense of validation. She hadn't been wrong. She had been right. The Thorne Empire was caught completely flat-footed. Marcus Thorne, a man who obsessively controlled his public image, woke up to find his son had become the global poster boy for entitlement. His PR team was in crisis mode. Their initial strategy, a stony silence, hoping it would blow over, had backfired spectacularly. Their silence was interpreted as guilt. Inside the Thorne family's palatial Manhattan penthouse, the atmosphere was glacial. Marcus Thorne, normally a man of formidable composure, was furious. "Look at this!" he roared, throwing a tablet onto the table. It showed a news segment analyzing the optics of the situation. "You weren't just an idiot, Peter. You were a liability. You took my name, our name, and you dragged it through the mud because you couldn't handle a flight attendant asking a simple question." Peter, who had spent the night partying in St. Bart's after finally arriving on a replacement jet, had been summoned back immediately. He looked pale and shaken. The triumphant smirk was long gone. "She hit me, Dad," he protested. "She assaulted me." "And you let her," Marcus shot back. "You gave her the power. You couldn't de-escalate. You couldn't use your words. You had to act like a common thug, and then run crying to me. And my response, my attempt to protect you, has been twisted into an act of corporate tyranny." Arthur Finch, present for the dressing down, stepped in. "Marcus, the narrative is running away from us. Rossi's piece framed this perfectly for them. We need to get ahead of it." "How?" Marcus demanded. "We issue a statement," Finch said. "We control the story. Peter will issue a public apology. He'll express regret for any misunderstanding on the flight. He'll state that while he was shocked by the physical altercation, he understands that people can have bad days, and he wishes Ms. Croft well. It'll be magnanimous. It makes him look like the bigger person." "Apologize," Peter balked. "To her." "You'll do as you're told," Marcus snarled. "This is no longer about your feelings. This is about protecting a $30 billion enterprise that you seem determined to torpedo." The apology was released that afternoon. It was a masterclass in corporate PR speak, full of phrases like sincere regret and a moment of high tension. It backfired. The internet eviscerated it. Comments poured in. Translation, "Sorry I got caught, being a douchebag." Notice he doesn't apologize for his behavior, just for the misunderstanding. The apology only added fuel to the fire. The GoFundMe for Melanie crested $150,000. The public outcry forced Aura Air to issue its own statement, a pathetic attempt to walk a tightrope. They spoke of their commitment to both passenger safety and employee well-being, and announced they were launching a full internal investigation. It was seen for what it was, a weak, cowardly response from a company terrified of its most powerful client. In her small house in New Jersey, Melanie watched it all unfold on TV. She had been contacted by Gloria Allred's office. She had requests for interviews from every major news network. The Flight Attendants Union, FAA-CWEA, had reached out, offering their full legal and public relations support. She was no longer alone. She had an army behind her. Her local union representative, a tough, seasoned woman named Jessica Vance, came to her house to talk strategy. "Melanie, you're in the driver's seat right now," Jessica said, sipping the coffee Melanie had brewed. "The public is with you. The money is there for a top-tier legal team. Thorne and Aura Air are back on their heels. We can make them pay." The fear was gone now, replaced by an intoxicating sense of power. It was the same feeling Peter Thorne probably felt every day of his life. It was addictive. "They tried to ruin me, Jessica," Melanie said, her voice hard. "They threatened to take my house, to give me a criminal record. They wanted to erase me. I don't want an apology. I don't just want a settlement. I want them to hurt. I want everyone to know what they are." Jessica nodded, recognizing the steel in Melanie's eyes. "Okay. Then we don't settle. We sue. We file a wrongful termination suit against Aura Air, and we file a suit against Peter Thorne for intentional infliction of emotional distress." "And his father?" Melanie asked. "Harder to touch him directly," Jessica admitted. "But we make this so public, so painful for his company's brand, that it damages him where he lives, his reputation, and his stock price." That evening, Melanie, flanked by Jessica and a high-powered lawyer from the union, stood on her front lawn in front of a bank of news cameras. The flashbulbs popped a chaotic symphony of light. She was no longer a flight attendant. She was a symbol. She cleared her throat, looked directly into the cameras, and began to speak. "My name is Melanie Croft. For 15 years, I was a loyal employee of Aura Air. I loved my job. On Tuesday, I was fired for doing that job, for prioritizing passenger safety. I was insulted, threatened, and told I was nothing more than staff. When I reacted out of pure human frustration, a billionaire used his power to ground a plane and have me fired. They tried to silence me. They offered me money to hide the truth. But I am not for sale, and I am not afraid. Mr. Thorne, you and your son picked a fight with the wrong woman." The statement was a declaration of war. It was carried live on every news channel. In his penthouse, Marcus Thorne watched his face like stone. The slap had become a tremor. Now Melanie Croft had just triggered the earthquake. The fight wasn't just about a slap anymore. It was about everything. And it was about to get much, much dirtier. The lawsuit landed like a bomb. Melanie Croft versus Aura Air Inc. and Peter Thorne. The allegations were explosive wrongful termination defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and creating a hostile work environment. Melanie's legal team, funded by the now enormous GoFundMe, which had surpassed $500,000, was a powerhouse firm that specialized in taking on corporate giants. They weren't just filing a lawsuit, they were launching a crusade. The initial phase of the legal battle was discovery, a process where each side is forced to turn over relevant documents, emails, and communications. For Melanie, this was a source of empowerment. For the Thorns, it was a threat. Arthur Finch and his legal team fought every request filing motions to quash subpoenas and limit the scope of the inquiry. But the judge, a no-nonsense woman who seemed unimpressed by the Thorn family's reputation, allowed most of Melanie's requests to proceed. Aura Eyre was forced to turn over Melanie's complete employment record. As her lawyers had hoped, it was pristine. 15 years of glowing performance reviews, commendations for handling in-flight medical emergencies, and not a single disciplinary action. This painted a clear picture. Melanie wasn't a rogue employee. She was a model one who had been pushed to a breaking point. The public feasted on these revelations. Every small legal victory for Melanie was amplified by the media and celebrated online. She became a regular fixture on cable news, articulating her case with a newfound eloquence and fire. The shy, frightened woman was gone, replaced by a confident, media-savvy warrior for the working class. She was powerful, and she loved it. But power, as Melanie was beginning to learn, is a poisoned chalice. Her newfound fame began to change her. The constant adulation, the supportive messages, the feeling of being on the right side of history, it started to warp her perspective. She began to see the fight not just as a quest for justice, but as a personal vendetta. Her conversations with her legal team became less about strategy and more about punishment. "I want to see his text messages," she demanded in one meeting. "I want to see Peter's texts with his father right after the slap. I want to know exactly what they said about me." Her lead lawyer, a shrewd man named Ben Carter, cautioned her. "Melanie, we have to be careful not to look like this is purely a fishing expedition. Let's focus on the corporate malfeasance." "It is personal, Ben," she retorted. "They made it personal when they threatened my daughter's home." Aura Eyre, desperate to extricate itself from the PR nightmare, offered a substantial settlement. A 7-figure sum, a public apology, and a commitment to revise their employee support policies. It was a huge win, more money than Melanie had ever dreamed of. Jessica Vance, the union rep, was ecstatic. "Melanie, this is it. We did it. You take this, you're set for life. You can put all of this behind you." Melanie looked at the offer. A year ago, it would have been a miracle. Now it felt like an insult. "No," she said, her voice cold. Ben Carter stared at her. "Melanie, this is an incredible offer. We should seriously consider this." "They're not offering it because they're sorry," Melanie countered, her voice rising. "They're offering it to make this go away, to protect Thorn. And what about Peter? Does he get away with it? Does he just write a check and go back to his life?" "No. I want my day in court. I want him on the stand under oath. I want a jury to hear what he did." She was rejecting millions of dollars out of pride, out of a desire for revenge. Jessica and Ben exchanged a worried look. The heroic victim was beginning to sound like an obsessive crusader. They reluctantly conveyed her rejection of the offer. The rejection stunned Arthur Finch and the Thorn legal team. They had assumed she was motivated by money. Her refusal signaled something more dangerous. She was motivated by ideology. And ideologues were unpredictable. With the settlement off the table, Finch knew they had no choice but to fight, and to fight dirty. The gloves came off. Finch hired a team of the most ruthless private investigators in the country. Their mandate was simple: find everything there is to know about Melanie Croft. Dig into her past, her finances, her relationships, her sealed records. Find the skeleton in her closet and drag it into the light. While the investigators went to work, Melanie's team was making a breakthrough of its own. Sifting through thousands of pages of Thorn Dynamics corporate documents they had subpoenaed on the long-shot premise of proving a pattern of intimidating behavior, a junior paralegal flagged a series of transactions from 6 years prior. A small independent logistics company in Ohio. Croft & Son Logistics had been driven into bankruptcy following a hostile takeover by a subsidiary of Thorn Dynamics. When Ben Carter saw the name, his blood ran cold. He called Melanie immediately. "Melanie," he said carefully, "I need to ask you about your ex-husband, David." "What was the name of his company?" "Croft & Son Logistics," she said. "It was his father's company." "Why?" Ben took a deep breath. "Melanie, according to these documents, the company that acquired his assets and forced him into bankruptcy was a shell corporation owned by Thorn Dynamics." Silence on the other end of the line. For a full 10 seconds, Melanie said nothing. Then a low, guttural sound, something between a gasp and a sob. The bankruptcy had destroyed her marriage. David, a proud man, had been broken by the loss of his family's legacy. He had fallen into a depression, started drinking heavily, and become a ghost of the man she had married. That was why he was always late on child support. That was why her life had been a financial struggle for the past 6 years. All this time, the architect of her personal misery, the invisible hand that had wrecked her family, was Marcus Thorn. The slap the firing, it wasn't the beginning of her conflict with the Thorns. It was just the latest chapter in a war she hadn't even known she was fighting. The discovery transformed her. Her quest for justice morphed into a white-hot, all-consuming rage. This was fate. This was cosmic retribution. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was an avenging angel for her broken family. She immediately leaked the information to Isabel Rossi at the Vanguard. Rossi, smelling an even bigger story, ran with it. The new headline was a sensation: Thorn's Secret War. Did Billionaire's company ruin flight attendant's family years before the slap? The story was a bombshell. It suggested the incident on the plane wasn't random, but the culmination of a long predatory history. Marcus Thorn was no longer just a billionaire protecting his son. He was a corporate villain who devoured small businesses, destroying lives in his wake. Thorn Dynamics stock, which had been resilient, finally took a noticeable dip. Marcus Thorn was apoplectic. This obscure 6-year-old acquisition, a minor deal he barely remembered, had come back to haunt him in the most public way imaginable. He had tried to be strategic to manage the crisis, but now it was personal. Melanie Croft had not just attacked his son and his company, she had attacked his legacy. He called Arthur Finch. "I don't care what it costs," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "I don't care what you have to do. End this. End her." Finch understood. The time for legal maneuvering was over. It was time to unleash the Kraken. 2 days later, the private investigators delivered their report. It was a thick file, and on the 3rd page they found it. The skeleton. 7 years ago, before her divorce, Melanie had been involved in a workplace incident at a different airline. A passenger had been verbally abusive, and Melanie, under stress from her husband's failing business, had snapped. She hadn't hit him, but she had screamed at him a tirade so intense that the passenger had a panic attack. The incident had been quietly settled, with Melanie being forced to attend anger management counseling and sign an NDA. The record was sealed. It was the one secret she had ever kept. Arthur Finch smiled. It was more than enough. He didn't leak it to a gossip blog. That was too crude. He leaked it to a respected conservative-leaning newspaper known for its skepticism of viral victims. He provided them with a sworn affidavit from the passenger in the prior incident, who was happy to break his NDA in exchange for a generous consulting fee from a Thorn-affiliated entity. The story that ran the next day was devastating. The headline read, "Hero Flight Attendant's Secret History of Rage Sealed Docs Reveal Prior Violent Outburst Against Passenger." The article painted Melanie not as a hero, but as a woman with a history of emotional instability and a dangerously short temper. It reframed the slap on Peter Thorne not as a righteous act of defiance, but as part of a disturbing pattern of behavior. It included quotes from anonymous former colleagues, likely paid by Finch's investigators, who described her as difficult and prone to meltdowns. The public narrative, once so firmly in her corner, began to fracture. The comments on social media shifted. Wait, so she's done this before? I'm starting to think the billionaire kid might have had a point. #Team Melanie is awfully quiet today. The GoFundMe donations slowed to a trickle, then stopped. People who had seen her as a symbol of their own struggles now saw a woman who might just be unstable. Her power, built on the foundation of a simple, clean narrative, was crumbling now that the story had become complicated, messy. Melanie was shattered. They had found her one vulnerability and driven a knife into it. At her next press conference, the questions weren't sympathetic anymore. They were sharp, accusatory. "Ms. Croft, why didn't you disclose this prior incident? Is it true you were forced into anger management? Can you really claim to be a victim when you have a history of aggressive behavior?" She stammered, tried to explain the context, the stress she was under. But it sounded like an excuse. The public's love affair with her was over. They had lifted her onto a pedestal, and now, with the same fickle energy, they were getting ready to tear it down. The chalice of power she had been drinking from was, she realized too late, filled with poison. And she had drunk it to the dregs. Arthur Finch's counterattack was a masterstroke of character assassination. The story of Melanie's prior workplace incident, expertly leaked to a respectable newspaper, was devastating. It didn't just tarnish her image. It reframed the entire narrative. She was no longer a righteous victim, but a woman with a pattern of instability and aggression. The article, complete with a paid-for affidavit from the previous passenger, painted her as a volatile opportunist. The public tide, once a tidal wave of support, reversed with breathtaking speed. The #TeamMelanie hashtag became a cesspool of doubt and recrimination. Her GoFundMe page was disabled. Ben Carter, her lawyer, delivered the grim reality: Finch will use this to paint you as a grifter who engineered a payday. He'll argue the slap was premeditated. In court, our case is now critically wounded. The adulation she had grown accustomed to was replaced by the harsh glare of suspicion. The media requests stopped. The supportive calls went silent. Melanie was isolated again, no longer an anonymous victim, but a public pariah, haunted by the fear that she had destroyed herself through her own prideful crusade. While Melanie's public standing collapsed, however, a different kind of reckoning was brewing within the Thorne empire. The story of the hostile takeover of her ex-husband's company hadn't disappeared. It had captured the attention of Isabel Rossi, the tenacious journalist at the Vanguard, who sensed a much deeper vein of corruption. She continued to dig, collecting off-the-record stories from other people whose lives had been upended by Thorne dynamics. The architect of the entire crisis, Peter Thorne, was living in a gilded cage of his own. Exiled by his furious father, he was stripped of his power and left to stew in his public humiliation. The memes and the late-night jokes had made him a global punchline. For the first time, solitude forced him to confront his actions, the casual arrogance, the dismissive cruelty, and he felt a profound, burning shame. His resentment toward his father grew daily. Marcus hadn't just protected his company. He had sacrificed his son's reputation to do it. One evening, fueled by a toxic cocktail of guilt and anger, Peter did the unthinkable. He slipped into his father's private study, a sanctuary of power where Marcus kept his most sensitive files. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, perhaps some leverage or simply an answer. He found it in a folder ominously labeled Project Nightingale. Inside were internal memos detailing a systematic predatory strategy to aggressively neutralize small competitors, including David Croft's business. The documents were a smoking gun, outlining practices that were ruthless, unethical, and likely illegal. A note from Arthur Finch confirmed the liability. Marcus, the paper trail on Nightingale is thin, but not invisible. This was the source of his family's fortune. This was the rot at the core of the empire. A war raged within him. Loyalty to the father who gave him everything versus a duty to the truth his father had tried to bury. He looked at the cold, clinical words that described the destruction of families like Melanie's and saw his own reflection, another pawn, in his father's grand immoral game. With trembling hands, he photographed the most damning documents. Using a burner email account, he sent the files to the one person he knew would understand their power, Isabel Rossi. The subject line was a single word: Nightingale. When Rossi opened the files, she knew she held the story of her career. This was the irrefutable proof she needed delivered by an anonymous angel of vengeance. She worked through the night, and her article went live at dawn, timed to hit the market open. The headline was a stake through the heart of the Thorn Empire: the Nightingale Memos, leaked documents, allege billionaire Marcus Thorn led decade-long scheme to illegally crush competition. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The Department of Justice and the SEC announced formal investigations within hours. Thorn Dynamics stock went into a nosedive, shedding billions in value as investors panicked. The board of directors, once fiercely loyal, called for an emergency meeting to oust their founder. In her small New Jersey house, Melanie Croft watched the news, her jaw slack. The personal battle she had waged, the fight for her name and her dignity, had been completely eclipsed. It was now a mere footnote in a colossal scandal that was bringing down one of the most powerful men in the world. The karma she had so desperately sought had finally arrived, but it wasn't a clean, righteous thunderbolt. It was a chaotic, destructive inferno, and it was threatening to burn everyone to the ground. The Nightingale Memos triggered a corporate apocalypse. The Department of Justice and the SEC descended upon Thorn Dynamics, launching investigations that paralyzed the company. The fallout was biblical. Marcus Thorn, the man who could halt air traffic with a word, was forced to step down as CEO. His empire was dismantled, and his legacy, once a monument to success, became a testament to hubris. His world shrank to depositions and the cold glare of criminal defense attorneys. Even his fixer, Arthur Finch, was consumed by the blaze, disbarred for his role in the schemes. Peter was never publicly outed as the leaker, but his father knew. The silent war between them became a permanent, icy severance. Cast out from the family empire, Peter vanished from the high society world he once commanded. He landed in a small Midwestern town, taking a humbling job in a logistics warehouse, the very kind of business his father would have destroyed. Stripped of his privilege, he began the slow, arduous work of building a life that was truly his own, finding a quiet dignity he never knew in his gilded cage. And what of Melanie Croft, the woman who had started it all? Her crusade ended not with a bang, but a whimper. With her credibility destroyed and the media's attention fixated on the larger corporate scandal. Her lawsuit withered. The GoFundMe was long gone, her legal funds depleted. She finally accepted a settlement from Aura Air and the Thorne estate, a fraction of the original offer. It was enough to secure her home and pay her debts, but it was a hollow victory. Unemployable in the airline industry, she retreated into anonymity, moving with her daughter to a quiet town in Pennsylvania. A year later, while pushing her daughter on a park swing, a news alert flashed on her phone. Marcus Thorne had avoided prison, agreeing to a record-breaking $1.2 billion settlement with the DOJ. For a moment, the old anger flared. He had paid his way out of true justice. But as she watched her daughter laugh, soaring into the evening sky, the anger subsided. She had lost the war she set out to win, but she had found a fragile peace she never expected. The hard karma of Flight 771 had spared no one. It had shattered the powerful, humbled the proud, and forced them all to live among the ashes of their former lives. So who was right and who was wrong? Was Melanie a hero or a hothead? Was Marcus Thorne a protective father or a corporate predator? The truth is, they were all of them. This story shows us that life isn't a movie with clear heroes and villains. It's a messy, complicated battlefield of human emotion, pride, and consequence. The slap was just a spark, but it ignited a wildfire because it landed in a world soaked in the gasoline of inequality, arrogance, and deep-seated resentment. It's a chilling reminder that a single impulsive moment can unravel entire empires and change the course of countless lives, proving that the ultimate power lies not in wealth or status, but in the choices we make when we're pushed to our absolute limit. What do you think? Who do you sympathize with the most in the end? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story gave you chills, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life dramas you won't find anywhere else.